Hi folks, welcome to Libertathius. I'm Adam.
And I'm Lisa.
We're here to explore the ideas behind libertarianism and atheism.
As ex-Mormon atheists, we want to show people that there's meaning and happiness in the world outside of religion and even away from God.
And as minarchist libertarians, we want to show the world how the government's role should be limited to protecting natural rights. And that is the first time, as we bring this podcast near to its end, that I have finally memorized that intro. Lisa, we have a special guest with us today.
Yes, we do, and I'm excited for it.
My old classmate, a talented artist and designer. Rob, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you with us.
Again, yes, we've had him on once before, talking
That's
about
right.
the Free State Project out in New Hampshire with a bunch of libertarians.
That's right.
What is liberty like? Can you tell me how that feels?
I joke anytime I go into Boston when I drive home that it's just like an invisible anvil has been lifted off my chest. As I cross from Massachusetts into New Hampshire and can legally unbuckle my seatbelt, but I don't because I'm reasonable.
Right.
But there is importance in the I could, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's important. What is the most, like, I know that's not necessarily our topic, but like, what is the most recognizable difference that you feel going from the statist paradises in which we live to the libertarian nightmare in which you live? Kidding, of course.
Yeah. So it's a lot of like soft things with. It comes down to culture, really, outside of laws. People here are much more comfortable with things like gun ownership and open carry. I went into a Starbucks recently, or not recently, actually, but I went to a Starbucks in one of the blue towns, right? It's Democrat. It's been Democrat for a long time. And this dude's sitting there sipping his coffee, looking at spreadsheets, and he's got at least a 9mm on display. And
At least.
I didn't get a good read on it. But, it's just things like that. And I know that it's a lot easier to start a business out here, even outside, within the greater, like, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. There's way more people doing small things that would be very hard to do in California. I know someone who has a bakery startup that they started in their kitchen, and that's illegal in California.
Yeah, because you have to have a food handler's license or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Which means anyone who could potentially disrupt that market, if they could just start, is stopped before they begin.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny when I mention about how occupational licensing can be a barrier to entry and make it difficult for people to get started. People are like, well, do you want people selling you like poisoned food? And I'm like, what kind of business model is like trying to poison people? Like, I don't understand that. Like, it's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And let's face it, when it comes to all this licensing stuff, what we're really doing is making sure that the government knows what you're doing so that it can, skim off the top of your business. I mean, that's what it's really about. It's maybe in the name of public safety, but we know what it's about.
Yeah.
Right? Because the government doesn't create anything.
No.
All it can do is take.
Yeah.
So Rob, in the Mad Max post-apocalyptic nightmare in which you live, and people walk around in Starbucks with guns, is it just violence and shooting constantly all the time?
Of course, it's not, Adam.
No, Well, I want to hear his perspective, I could be wrong about, what I think about the world. And when I went on Facebook a couple of times this week, I got the impression that guns caused people to go insane and just shoot wantonly. So I just wanted to know what that was like for you, Rob.
No, my experience lines up with the data, which is that New Hampshire's a very safe place. The most dangerous place is the biggest city, which is Manchester. And oddly enough, Manchester is safer than the town I grew up in California, despite being 6 times larger. So this isn't like a per capita thing. This is like total at 6 times the size. It is significantly safer in the most dangerous part of this state. Right. So, yeah, I just sometimes joke that armed neighbors make polite neighbors.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
So life goes along even though you have the ability to defend yourself. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's
Unbelievable. Right. I don't know why I'm in such a sarcastic mood this morning, guys. I'm sorry.
I don't
either. But I'm having fun, you know. I like to imagine myself living in such a place. Although Arizona's not too bad. Arizona's pretty good. Weather-wise, it probably couldn't be more different than New Hampshire, I imagine. But but in terms of freedom, you know, I also vacationed recently in California, and you know, we are very much getting used to not having masks around. Like the CDC was like, okay, masks are, I mean, you're not going to wear them anyway, so whatever, guys. And then we were like, sweet. And I know that most of the people walking around are probably not vaccinated. And it's like, nobody cares. And then we go to California, and I was like, oh, I need to like start bringing it with me again, because the norm around me is very different. Like people are like sitting in restaurants across from each other with masks on.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Which
I think is just beyond the pale. But, you know, I want to ask you this, Rob, and well, also Lisa, frankly, you know, it's like just tribes now, right? I mean, if you're wearing a mask, it's like you're wearing a badge, right? And if you're not wearing a mask, it's also wearing a badge, right? Like, has this ever been about public safety in your minds?
Yes.
I think initially it was kind of about safety, and certainly from the perspective of the people wearing the masks there in the first like 4 to 6 months, it was doing something when you felt like you couldn't do much. But lately, I don't know. I'm inclined to think it's kind of become tribal. Like people are wearing their masks almost to prove they don't like Trump or something. Like,
no, that's exactly right. I experienced the same thing. It's both. It's for health and public safety. The people who I think tend to be most concerned health-wise are those who have health problems, which, you know, there are genuine concerns there because there are people who are immunocompromised because of various reasons.
Right.
But one of my friends on Facebook was posting about COVID shots or vaccines or something. And one of her friends said, yeah, I'm not really concerned about the virus. I just wear the mask so people don't think I'm a Republican.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the vibe I've been getting. Yeah.
So it's both. It is for health reasons for some people. For other people, it's to make a political statement or to distance yourself from the other side politically.
Yeah, and I think the reverse is also probably true. Like people walking around without them because, you know,
they don't want to. They want people to think they're Democrats.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No. That's kind of where I'm. But yeah, that's just the sense I've been getting. Obviously, I think that public safety is an important issue, and you know, I don't think COVID-19 is a hoax, you know, but you know, like Rahm Emanuel says, right? You don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
So,
well, Texas has been like free mask stuff for a while. Like the governor signed something that said, if an institution receives public funding, if they receive funding from the government, you cannot mandate masks. And we've been just socially, we've been going without masks for a long time. Businesses, I think as of a couple of months ago, they finally stopped requiring masks to enter their building. So Costco, they still suggest it for those who aren't vaccinated, but the governor also said businesses are not allowed to ask if you have been vaccinated. So it's kind of like an honor system type thing. Yeah. So, Rob, how are things as far as masks in New Hampshire? How's that been going?
A couple months ago, people basically stopped wearing them. And then, I mean, we never technically had any, like, laws in place. There was a governor's order, which was somehow technically different, to have some in place, but it seemed to be more to arm businesses with that backing, because the whole time there was a significant contingent of people who would not wear a mask. And from what I've been told, some of them could make life difficult on clerks and other people working out in the wild. But
in the wild.
Culturally, I've been working from home this whole time, so it's like I've reemerged into the sun, covering my eyes, hissing. But yeah, it's most people don't wear them now. If I go to the grocery store, I might see one person still masked up, but I don't see it very much. I even went down to Massachusetts a couple months ago, and even though they had the laws in place, hardly anyone was wearing them.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Although Massachusetts is having a spike now, but hey, who knows? Who actually knows?
Yeah, who knows? The data's all over the place. We don't know.
So we've talked a little bit about Republicans and Democrats and the tribes and the badges we wear. But what about libertarians? Kind of just teasing our topic a little bit, but not fully diving in just yet. What is the libertarian stance? We as libertarians, what do we believe, Rob, when it comes to masks and all that fun stuff?
I think, which is how
exactly.
I start any summary of a libertarian position on anything. Mm-hmm. I think it falls to people's choice, and you would defer to property owners' rights in most cases. So if you don't want to wear a mask, but the owner of, Al's Food Mart is asking people to wear masks to enter his food mart, you would either show that respect and acknowledge his rights, or you would not enter. Mm-hmm. I think that's roughly the libertarian stance. And then, but then you get into
statist. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that sounds like kind of my understanding as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I like that answer. I do understand that we can carry germs with us even if we're immunized, and apparently the immunization is like 50-50 these days anyway. But there's like, we can. It's not just about us protecting ourselves. It's also about protecting each other, and I think that's where we can kind of get into a more nuanced view of, like, what do you mean by freedom? Because we believe in making free decisions for ourselves, but we do recognize that, maybe there's a role for someone to say something when it comes to the way we might affect each other. And I wanted to know if you had any, like, further thoughts about that.
Yeah, in general, I think that stuff, if we were talking purely philosophical, it would defer to things like property rights, like self-ownership and then property rights.
Body autonomy.
Yeah. But then beyond that, like within the world we exist in, then you get into the questions of, well, do I have to wear a mask because the law tells me to? Is that the law? And then you get into contrarians who, now that there's a law, maybe they would have worn a mask into Al's hypothetical food mart, but now there's a law, so they're not going to wear a mask, and they will not be seen wearing a mask.
Do you think libertarianism sometimes contracts contrarians? Unlikely probably, but what do you think?
Are you still being sarcastic?
Yes. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Well, I when I think about the stories I've heard of people's journey into libertarianism,
yeah,
I do think there's a lot of there's a high likelihood that people will be contrarian by nature, like they don't want to be told what to do. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's all that they do, but that tendency is a tendency that would lead one to read about and learn about all the ways they were duped during their public education, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there is some of that in there, and I think it's also a part of why within the libertarians, the liberty movement, you have all the particular flavors of libertarian coffee, right? You've got the ANCAPs and you've got the LPers, and they like to argue with each other.
Right.
Yeah, they do.
And you don't see that in the major parties. Like, all these people did not vote for Kamala in the Democratic primary. And overwhelming numbers. But once they were told, she's your VP, suddenly they're making paintings of her. And it's like, no, you voted Bernie or Warren when the time came. You didn't. You could have supported her, and you didn't. But at the same time, I don't know if it's a generous phrase to say, but like, fall in line within the party. And libertarians don't have that. Like, there is the Libertarian Party, but a lot of libertarians are not in it, or they disagree about it.
Well, and I kind of wanted to get into something that you had mentioned to us in our Discord channel. You mentioned that there was some drama going on with the drama is almost kind of a... It doesn't quite capture the flavor of what happened, but with the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, there's some stuff going on, and that was probably a month ago or so. So
yeah, 1 to 2 months.
Can you tell us what happened and sort of how things have gone since then?
Yeah, so roughly, there were some critiques of the Libertarian Party that in recent months and post-COVID, that the party itself has been almost beholden to the woke. Like, that's like the critique. The other side would say we're trying to behave professionally, right? That's how they would define it.
Okay.
And so in the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, every state's party has its own rules for how they elect people to different seats and whatnot within it. And the Mizzes Caucus, which has a nationwide presence and then has statewide presences, which are generally complementary to the Libertarian Party, they followed the rules to the letter and won a bunch of seats in New Hampshire. And included in that, they got access to like the social media platforms. And this is where it gets to be dramatic, because the people who don't want to be seen as woke got a hold of social media. And while they make some fair points out the gate, they tweeted things that were very inflammatory. They tweeted things about child labor, about child laws, about... They tweeted some things that were like arguably true about the big one. So the one that got Justin Amash's attention when he asked the world, does the LP really want to be courting edgelords? Was a comment about John McCain, how the tumor that John McCain had did more to ensure world peace than any politician, or something like that, right?
What?
And because, right, I mean, what sand country did John McCain ever see that he wasn't willing to bomb? Is a fair critique of his tenure.
Absolutely. Yeah, when it comes to the military-industrial complex, even though he was originally very critical of it, he did eventually fall into step with that machine. And so there's something to be said there, but it's also in bad taste, you might say.
It's how it's said. Like, the person intended that to create a reaction and get people upset.
Yeah, and I don't remember exactly how, but somehow it got onto Megan's radar, Meghan McCain. I can't remember if they tagged her and then someone floated it, but like between Justin Amash and the McCain thing, that's how it became within the LP a nationwide incident. So then what happens is someone who had been in the LPNH previously and still had access to the credentials, blocked all the new people out. Right. And that was when internally it became really dramatic. And since then, the people who won per the rules got control back of the things they control. And if you go read it, have tampered their energy, let's say. Although it's still more that flavor. They're not saying this person died and that was good for peace to the person's child, right? Like, right. Technically correct in multiple instances, but then the other side was arguably not. Part of the argument was that they weren't really promoting freedom. Like, you guys did that episode on the logic fallacies. And there was within libertarians, there's a lot of no true Scotsmen.
Right.
Yes. And that's where a lot of this comes from, because you have the LP whose goal is to grow a legitimate political organization that eventually becomes capable of winning contests.
Right. Yeah, their goal is to get people elected.
And one of the critiques of them is, well, they're not very good at it. But at the same time...
Sorry, so the Mises Caucus, you mentioned that before. How does that fit in? Like, what is it? And why are there people within the Libertarian Party itself? Why are they so against the Mises Caucus as a group of people?
So the members of the Mises Caucus who are involved in this changing of the guard, so to speak, are the generally going to be a more aggressive type of activism. They're not going to, like, a lot of the Libertarian Party folks want to, like, walk like a duck, talk like a duck, but in their mind, the duck is the Republican and Democrat parties.
Oh,
and in this case, the Mises people are like, no, like, and it hasn't worked, would be part of their argument. So, like, the Mises Caucus outside of this incident, I don't know a ton about.
Okay.
Yeah. So now what's happened is the people who won their seats fair, right? They were technically right. They got their seats back and have tampered the party's messaging. It's still a little more assertive, but it's not at all kowtowing to certain ideas.
Okay.
So yeah.
So a woman named Gilletta, she had sort of taken control and gotten rid of all the people she didn't agree with who had won the election fair and square. There was some drama with that. She, a woman I heard in a podcast, she said that she doesn't think this was Giletta's idea. She thinks that there was someone whispering in her ear and who put this idea in her head. Do you know who that was, by the way?
I do not.
I listened to a couple people who were on a podcast about this, and they both said, you know, I think I know who this whispering person behind, you know, this worm tongue was behind, you know, in Giletta's ear. But one woman wouldn't say, and the guy said, I think I know who it is, and for people around here, if you think you know who it is, it's probably that guy. But they wouldn't say. And I don't, as far as I know, Gilletta hasn't outed that person, so she's just taking the heat for everything.
Yeah. No, I've met Gilletta a couple times. She's run for governor. Like, she wouldn't know me. Like, I've just talked to her a few times, and she was the chair of the party. I believe it was chair previous to the shifting of seats. And yeah, once they got that attention and had a handful of these tweets, she, made a bold move. It's one of those ones where she's like, she was technically, they had won. And again, I don't know exactly if she pressed the button or whatever, but then the Mises Caucus had won fair and square by the rules.
Right.
And then the previous folks panicked. And I can kind of see why they would panic. I can sympathize with some of the tweets that were coming out. I was watching the tweets live. I was like, whoa. And once Justin Amash starts accusing your party of, or your organization of courting edgelords, it's worth taking a minute to pause and reflect. Yeah.
Well, and the guy who wrote the tweets, so I forget his name, but that's the podcast I listened to, one of them. His idea clashes with Justin Amash's. So Justin Amash's idea, or his, I guess, philosophy, is that saying things in an extreme or shocking way indicates an insecurity in your ideas. And the way he says it is, write like Ernest Hemingway. Get rid of adjectives and just stick with your clear sentences and a clear message. And his view is that if you have solid ideas, people will latch on to that. But the guy who wrote these tweets, his idea is completely different. His idea is that you say these kind of inflammatory things, you're courting edgelords, but that's because that gets your message out to more people. And so you'll have a bunch more people who are rejecting that message and who are angry about it, but it gets more traction. You just have more eyeballs on the thing. And so you'll get more people in that way, because you will have more people who reject it, but you'll also have more people who see it and identify with it. So it's a completely different way of approaching this thing, of attracting attention and getting people into the party and introducing libertarian ideas.
Yeah, I think that philosophy of communications is short-sighted. It will get you immediate impact, right? You might get another 1,000 Twitter followers.
Right.
There's no way to immediately tell how many of them are hate following you. And if you have 1,000 new followers and $1, you have $1. So, but long term, I feel like one of the things that isn't necessarily considered when you take that approach to its extreme, and I do think there's a time and a place for that approach, but when you take that approach to its extreme, we aren't just dealing in a vacuum of exposing people to ideas in a puritanical sense. We are dealing with an environment in which if people are tuning into any legacy media and they're hearing about libertarians or libertarianism or liberty ideas, they are being filtered with the quote-unquote the worst.
Yes.
It is like very recently, as recently as January, someone in the Biden administration lumped in libertarians and anti-tax activists with ISIS and,
oh my God,
and some domestic group that actually does violence.
Yep, I saw that. That ticked me off so bad. Even Tulsi Gabbard spoke out against that. And she was like, this is a problem.
Yes.
Domestic terrorists is, I think, the lump group that we were put into.
Yeah.
Possible domestic terrorists. Yeah, libertarians.
Yeah, if you pay any attention, the whole non-aggression principles frequently the first thing we talk about and we'll bore you to death with.
Yeah. Oh, so, yep, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I think that there's a level of consideration that is either not being taken or is just ignored when you get activism of this sort. Like, I do think there's a time and a place for that sort of, let's say, anger or vitriol. But in a political party, like, the organization exists to become legitimate. So if you're going to do that, you're operating against the organization's mission. And if you disagree with their mission, taking it over and flipping their comms doesn't seem like a good way to win hearts and minds or get out your message.
Yeah. Did this drama that happened, did that affect PorcFest at all? Like, because I wanted to go to PorcFest this year. I wasn't able to make it. We had plans switched and stuff. But do you know if the drama with the New Hampshire Libertarian Party, did that affect PorcFest negatively?
No, PorcFest had more or less sold out prior. The first post-COVID PorcFest was almost destined to sell out, but from what I've heard, it was a resounding success. And I personally didn't make it, but a lot of people showed up. Very positive reviews. It went very well. And this drama, I think, had mostly blown over by then. And or if it came up, it's also one of those things where the internet does us no favors as a communications platform, right? We're not talking, it's text, you read it in the worst possible tone. So wherever it would have come up, you would have been talking to these people in person. And let's be real, in person, you're not going to tell Meghan McCain it's good that her dad died. You know, like, I try to not say anything on the internet I wouldn't say to someone's face, for instance. Right? That's just me.
Well, that's a very good philosophy.
And, you know, to be fair to some of them, I think some of them might do that in person.
It's true.
And again, that's a different type of activism. But but yeah, as far as I know, PorcFest was a resounding success.
Very good. I'm glad to hear it. What was that, Adam?
Oh, no, I was just basically agreeing. Yeah, I have basically the same philosophy. Like, but yeah, I wouldn't say such a thing to people like that. But isn't this kind of like the tale as old as time when it comes to libertarianism. Like, we've always had this battle between people that would like to grow the party and people that want to keep it pure. And I think that kind of comes to like the crux of our problem here when it comes to the cultural relevancy. Because I think the Republican and Democrat parties don't really care about principles, right? They don't really care. They're really just like almost like marketing companies, right? And like all they're interested in doing is growing. They've abandoned philosophy altogether, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
And so is that what it takes? And if so, is that something we want, right? So I don't know. I'm with you on not courting edgelords. Like, that's how I am. I don't want to grow my party through 4chan. But like at the same time, if we do want to grow, what do we do? And I guess that's really what our topic is today. And I think this is a problem that libertarianism has been facing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's... So I view both parties as for-profit entities at this point. Like, like you said, there is no philosophy. The problem the Republicans have is, at this point, their marketing message is, we're not the Democrats. Like, they don't have anything else. They can't point to low spending. They can't point to freedoms or deregulation. Like, they can't point to any of those things that they ought to be able to. And one of the things that you see about... So, yes, the libertarian movement... It is a tale as old as time. That's a very fair way to put it. And one of the things that you see happening here is more and more libertarian types who are into the idea of political parties are just joining up as Republicans. But they are running, and when they win, they are voting and legislating by their philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
like
kind of what Justin Amash did.
Yeah. And the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance like measures them, and it's they've done a lot of really good work, and also certain things that seem really minor but are hilarious to say. For instance, recently the state house rescinded during some house cleaning I think a statute, I think that's what it technically is, that previously made it to where you couldn't open carry a gun while driving a snow machine. So and I just like to know that I could, in the middle of winter, drive my snow machine while strapped.
I think that's important, you know.
Yeah. And they've also done a lot, but it's like that little, for that little detail to be passed, they had to win a lot of big fights. They had to win a lot of, we have constitutional carry, we have constitutional, it's conceal and open, and there's a lot of deregulation that, especially, for instance, around brewing. That's why there's so many. Like, New Hampshire has the most nano breweries per capita, or at least they used to. I know other states, since seeing the explosion of growth of these businesses, have followed suit, especially in the New England area. But that's because of these liberty-oriented people getting into office and voting their philosophy.
Yeah. Well, and I was talking to my sister about this a little bit, one of my sisters, and she said, she's like, for whatever my opinion's worth, libertarians don't need to go pandering. She says that there are people who are looking for something different. They're not happy with the current mainstream options. And so from her, and she used to be Republican. She still considers herself conservative, but she's like, neither of these parties, I don't like my two options. She doesn't like the Republican Party. But her point of view is just stand on your principles, be upfront with what you believe. So the fact that you guys are doing things differently, that's something that would appeal to someone like my sister, who is conservative leaning, but she doesn't like the Republican Party. And so I don't think she would want a party that wants to be like the Republicans or who wants to be like the Democrats.
Yeah, I think that's a common sentiment. I think the fact that Trump won one presidency proves that. Like, the people who were voting for Trump were not voting for the Republicans.
No.
Like, they were voting for a guy who was speaking to a part of the country that has been largely ignored and or villainized for decades. And that includes the Republican Party, like, ignoring and villainizing them or vilifying them. like, the fact that the president was Donald Trump says a lot about people's faith in the GOP and even the DNC, because if Trump was, right, I mean, oh, he's a reality show, like, then any Democrat should have walked that in, right? That's like a 2-inch putt. And they didn't. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of sentiment like that. And that is one way where some, like, a contingent of activists here are trying to be culturally relevant, is by effectively going into the Republican Party or Republican, counties and whatnot, and running on liberty philosophy, which, if you read a lot of Republican stuff, a lot of it should overlap. Like, their policies don't historically, but it should. So I think that there is a ripe audience there. And when you look at the last election, at the state level, everything went D. But at the local level, like, every battleground went R. And a lot of them were NHLA affiliated, or in some cases actually just free staters who've lived here for a while.
Okay.
So you see that people are, like, they didn't want to vote for Trump, so they voted Biden, but then they voted Sununu, and then they voted R down the ticket, basically, which is an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. So another question for you. So as I was reading, last time you were on our show, afterwards, I went into research mode and I looked up a bunch of stuff about New Hampshire. Okay. And one of the things that I read is that as far as culture, people in New Hampshire, they're not very warm and welcoming to people the way that people in Minnesota or Iowa are. You know, there's the Minnesota nice, culturally. And I read that in New Hampshire, it takes people a while to kind of warm up to you. But once they do, you're fine. So with libertarians moving to New Hampshire and running for office and getting elected, do you feel like locals, people who've lived there for decades and decades, do you feel like is there any animosity towards libertarians? I remember last time you mentioned that, you know, if you tell someone you're with the Free State Project, they don't know what that is. So in that sense, it's a good thing. But have you noticed any kind of animosity or suspicion or distancing that locals have toward libertarians who are running for office and getting elected and that type of thing?
No, not among locals. It's still roughly similar to how I would describe it previously, which is most people don't know what it is. The people who have been exposed to it are generally either, like, liberty friendly, or they're, I guess I should say, they're all very high information, like, voters, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
They know about it, and they're either liberty friendly high information voters, or they're very liberty opposition high information voters. And
okay.
And those people are, they might control as much of the public opinion of the FSP as the FSP does. Because in general, the DNC here is very well organized. And we're surrounded by blue states, like,
so blue. Oh
traditional Democrats. There's a lot of them, and there's not, the extremists don't have a lot of, like, power within the House and whatnot, but there are towns that they do. And, you know, they like to take the worst of what libertarians say publicly and then present it to their, you know, fellow whatevers.
Yeah.
So that does happen. I know a lot of people who are career professionals, the types who might go work at a large corporation, like, they do not open when they meet new people with the FSP. They wait.
Okay.
Like, contractors that are, like, people who are kind of independently, they earn their wealth or they earn their income independently, are much more likely to talk about it. Whereas if you have to go into an environment that's like an office where, frankly, where woke culture is a thing you have to worry about, you will find a resistance to opening with that to new people.
Okay. Because I'll be honest, New Hampshire's not off the table for me. I know last time when I mentioned that I get barometric pressure headaches and, like, New England is part of the worst in the country for that type of thing. Even that, it's still not off the table. I'm still searching. I am. Yeah. So that's why some of these are like New Hampshire specific, and because I mean, you're out there, and when I was out there, I think it was last year, I loved it out there. It was gorgeous. And we went in the middle of fall. It was just perfect. Oh, like if you can fall in love with terrain, my heart is Northern California and kind of New Hampshire.
Yeah. My wife and I, when we visited the first time, I was commenting on how it kind of reminded me of Tahoe. Like the trees are different. Yeah. The mountains are different. Yes. But the same vibe, same overall climate, except for with an ocean next door.
Right. Oh, I love it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
If any of our listeners, even if you don't move to New Hampshire, all of our listeners, you at least visit there.
Yeah, go to Pork Fest.
Yeah, Pork Fest. That's usually in June, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah, then Liberty Forum's usually a winter time. It's more buttoned up, so to speak. It's indoors, and it's like some people joke that that's when the libertarians pull out their suit once a year. And it's much more a traditional conference type event. But yeah, we've got those two big events, and every locality, so to speak, I think there's 6 regions off the top of my head. And every region has their own events going on, and most of them have calendars. Some of them keep their events kind of private. So if you found a group and it looks like they're not doing much, it's worth sending an email to their contact, because they might do things, but they don't publicize it. So yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot going on.
Nice. And do they... my sister she's had small town experiences, and she said that one of the things that smaller communities often do is they have festivals. They have events going on for the major holidays and stuff. That's what she's experienced. Is there that type of stuff in New Hampshire? Like Easter things, Christmas, 4th of July, all that type of stuff?
Yeah. When there's no COVID, the holidays are amazing.
Oh, when there's no COVID. Right.
Yeah. Halloween is awesome here. And Christmas time, lots of places like do up their lights and whatnot. And it's very much mostly a modern Western Christmas, right? It's not a high religiosity Christmas.
Okay.
In fact, last date I saw said that New England's the least religious area of the country.
Pacific Northwest is close as well. Yeah.
Okay. But once Christmas comes, it's put on the lights, put on the music, set up the trees. Every town has one. They do lightings. There's parades. Halloween has, like, the haunted houses out here are crazy, and the corn mazes, they're incredibly intricate. And then Easter, most towns do their own things. A lot of private communities do as well. My wife and I run one in our community, and then there's just sporadic stuff all throughout the summer. Hampton Beach has this world-renowned sand sculpture competition. And,
I've seen those. Yeah.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, this was the first year I actually saw them in person, and they're amazing. And they do it every year, and there's people from Canada and England and all over the world who come there and build these giant sand sculptures. So, yeah, one of the things that I remember... So, a family member on my wife's side from Sweden said to me that when you have, like, quote unquote hard winters, you really appreciate the rest of the year's, like, benefits.
Yes.
And if you're the type who can embrace winter instead of enduring it, if you're the type who's like, oh, it's wintertime, okay, well, now I get to go skiing, snowboarding, making snowmen, seeing ice sculptures, etc., etc. Then that's just another season of unique things to go do. And the communities here and in Maine and in Mass take full advantage of it.
You're doing a really good job of selling New Hampshire to me again, I gotta say. I lived in Minnesota for a couple of years when my husband and I first got married. And it's the same thing. Minnesota, the winters last about 6 months. And if you love the snow, it's great. But it also makes you really appreciate spring and fall and even summer. You can just deal with the bugs. But it does make you appreciate all the other seasons and what you can do during those times.
Yeah.
It sounds like a beautiful community. And I think that one thing that maybe Liberty can do for people is to sort of think about who lives near you and to build that community with them. Because if it isn't the government's role to take care of every little thing in our lives, then we become more reliant as community members on one another. At least I think so. And I don't know. I don't know if there's an effect there. I mean, I'm sure there's block parties in California, right? But at the same time, like, I don't know. I think there's this added isolation, particularly during COVID times. And if you are a little bit more government skeptical, then you might not cut yourself off quite as much. And that's maybe worth something.
Yeah, I think that as far as like cultural relevance goes, there's a lot of ground to be had on issues, because if you talk to a lot of people on their trip to becoming a libertarian, there was an issue that really mattered to them. And like, I'll just talk homeschool for a moment. Yeah, most of the people who come from the left into libertarianism come through education. Like, at some point they realized no matter how much money New York and California throw at it, it gets worse.
Right.
Which is significant. They throw a significant amount at it, and they're heavily unionized.
Yes. And it just keeps not working. And they realize that, and that's their issue. And then the next hurdle, so you've got an issue where you're like, okay, the government isn't doing this well, and maybe never has. And if you dig deep enough on that issue, you discover that our education system was created in roughly 1905 by one of, I think, Andrew Carnegie's guys, to create people who don't think critically. Which, if that's your objective...
Yeah, it's meant to be like industrial era type feel to it.
Well, it even goes before that. It starts with the British Empire. We're using the same techniques that they used because there were no computers. So they had to create a giant world-spanning bureaucracy. And so everybody had to be able to perform roughly the same functions to maintain this empire across, from a tiny island towards, most of the planet. So we really, that's where we get the idea of like the desks pointed in one direction, and we focus on the reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I can tell you from being in the belly of the beast that, social studies may exist, but it is second fiddle, third fiddle perhaps, to reading, writing, arithmetic.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know that British Empire element. But, I think that issue is one that a lot of people will sympathize on. Like, they'll hear it. And that is where you reach out at the edges to people within the homeschool co-op that we're a part of. They're not all libertarians. They're not all free staters, but they have a high willingness to listen. Like when they ask questions about other members of the group and whatnot, right? And I think that on every issue, a lot of people have one issue where they're a libertarian. Like, the majority of people have something, whether it's drugs, like, I should be able to do whatever I want with my body, weapons, business, money, anti-war. Like, most people have something where they are sympathetic. And being there for those people, the metaphor I used recently was that the way we communicate, it's like people are on one side of a hill and we're on the other side. And we have a big risk where people are coming up the hill and then they crest the top. And if the first thing they hear out of this group of people is something really aggressive or even insulting, they're going to turn around and go back down the hill. They're not going to come hang out with us.
You're exactly right.
And that's something that a lot of people who get here, right? So like a lot of the ANCAPs, you weren't an ANCAP when you were 8. Or I guess some people might say, yes, I was. But like But there's very few people born in ANCAP. Like, they come to it over time. They go through this journey of learning and discovery. And yes, they probably have a personality that is primed for it. They are the sort of person who doesn't like to be told or wants a good explanation when they are told to do something. But once you come over that hill, you want the people at the top of the hill to experience affirmations. And I think that that's something that we can do more of on an issue-by-issue basis.
Yeah. Like, if people get to the top of the hill and the libertarians on the other side are shouting, "You're a statist!" It's like, all right, fine. Well, then I'll just go back down to my side then, because apparently I'm not welcome here.
Yes. Yeah.
That seems to be the big crux of the problem.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about personality a little bit, in terms of like star power.
Sure.
I think one reason why a lot of people turn to libertarianism could be almost just thanks to Ron Paul, right? And I think that, obviously the issues matter, of course, but like who brought you that messaging, right? Who was on that hill, who reached down to you and said, "Oh, you're totally on my team." I think Ron Paul was great at that. And I don't see that we've had someone quite that inspiring. Now, on the one hand, I'm glad that we're the party where we don't paint people, right? Where we don't hold up Kamala Harris as the recent idol to be worshipped, right? I'm glad for that. But on the other hand, heroes matter, right? And so I think, what is it going to take? Because, Gary Johnson did well in terms of numbers, but he's not inspiring, right? And I had a lot of hope for Justin Amash. He dropped out after 2 weeks. I'm waiting for my Liberty Knight in shining armor, to come by and get all the young people out of that Bernie camp, because that's who inspired them, and get them away from these ideas of socialism and communism and towards something constructive. And I want to know what your thoughts were in terms of what the next libertarian hero looks like, and should we even desire one?
Yeah, I think I generally agree with the high level sentiment there, because like humans as an animal, we want to either lead or be led. Right. We're barely removed from any of our evolutionary predecessors. And
absolutely.
Libertarians, I think it might even be an evolutionary, like a move forward for the beast. That is, we knee-jerk don't want to just be led by someone, because those people can be bad actors, right? Like the uniqueness one of the uniquenesses amongst humans is we can deceive each other, and we can lie, and we can do all this stuff that no other animal can. They get to show their feathers, and they're either bigger or smaller, and that kind of settles the discussion.
Right.
And we don't have that. And I do think that's why heroes matter, though, because we're still looking for those people. We're looking for the animal with the biggest feathers within our group.
Yeah, we are.
And like I recently, I don't know if you guys have read any of William Durant's work, but I recently finished one of his essay collections called, I think, The Greatest Minds and Ideas of All Time. And he was talking about how in the United States and in a lot of Western culture in the 1900s, we abandoned this idea of heroes, and we have spent decades, maybe 100 years more, tearing down heroes, almost as a way to say, well, they weren't so great, to like make ourselves feel better, instead of having people who, despite their flaws, and in some cases basically being monsters if you dig too far on some of these guys, but at the same time, the value of inspirational figures is hard to measure, and most growth societies have those. And we can say all the stuff we want about how we don't like that, but you're still dealing with other humans. Like you don't win someone over by telling them they're wrong. You win someone over by sympathizing with their point of view and then adding to it.
Exactly.
And so I think that what does the next Liberty hero look like? I don't know, because I think most of the people who want to put themselves out there are not the type of person who is going to share messages in such a way that it like grows, right? They're great at activating a cohort who are like them, but they're not necessarily great at communicating beyond that cohort. Mm-hmm. And that's like last time I suggested some sales training, but
yes,
and that's the super draconian kind of jokey way to say it. But like, I mean, it can be a lot of things. I know a lot of libertarians are into some of what Jordan Peterson has to say. Mm-hmm. If you look at the rest of what he has to say, he talks a lot about communications. Like, read those chapters too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm in the middle of a book right now. It's by Frank Luntz, and it's called Words That Work. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. And so he's been in politics for, I don't know how many years, but he's got, let's see, the 10 rules of effective language. So he's basically teaching the readers how to communicate well and how to get your message across. And so I'll just read those off really quick, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So rule number 1, simplicity. Use small words. And it's not because your audience is dumb, it's that you can lose people if you start using words that they're not familiar with. Rule number 2 is brevity. Use short sentences. Don't go on and on and on and on. Rule 3, credibility is as important as philosophy. Rule number 4, consistency matters. So be consistent with your message. Rule 5, novelty. Offer something new. And in this one, I thought it was funny. He says, Americans are easily bored. If something doesn't shock or surprise us, we move on to something else. We're always in search of the next big thing, whether it be the next American Idol, a new television reality show. He's got reality in quotes. I think that's funny. A new gee whiz techno gizmo, the latest Madonna makeover, or something else that we haven't seen or heard before. Our tastes change as quickly as the seasons, and we expect the rest of society to keep up. So we need to work with that. Offer something new, something they haven't heard before.
I think in a lot of ways, that list does remind me of Ron Paul. Mm-hmm. I can remember, if even people that hated him were like, this guy is consistent. This guy has a solid philosophy. He knows what he's into. I don't agree with it, but you can't fault him for that.
Yeah.
And so, and I thought that was really important. And I can't think of anyone else who could get a crowd of people to cheer about raw milk, and how important it would be to be able to drink raw milk and collect rainwater. These are things that he would say in speeches and would get just raucous applause.
Yeah. And a lot of it's the way that he's delivering his message. If he were to go off on the scientific reasons for why raw milk is better for you, and if he were to delve into that stuff, he would lose his audience. So he's learned how to deliver this information in a way that the average person can understand and get on board with.
Yeah.
And so the other ones, I'm just going to finish the list really quick. Rule number 6, sound and texture matter. So language has a flow to it. There's a rhythm, and sounds, they have, sound and texture to them. So keeping that in mind. And this one, Adam, reminded me of what you said before. Rule 7, speak aspirationally.
Yeah.
So people want to feel inspired. In here he says, people will forget what you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So they want to be inspired. They want to feel that you can deliver on what you say and that you will make things better. That's why Trump's his I don't know what you call it, his saying, I guess, "Make America Great Again." It's incredibly vague, but you can read into it what you want, but it has an aspirational message. It's that we can do better, and we can make things better if you vote for me. So yeah, speak aspirationally.
That is also very Ron Paul. He had a certain cadence about the way he spoke, and it was very inspiring.
Right.
He was older, so he could get on these like little tangents and kind of ramble a bit. But man, he knew how to close out a speech.
Yes.
And he knew how to open. And I think even if you get a little bit lost and meandery in the middle, you can be forgiven by starting and ending really strongly.
That's right.
You know, I know I've said it on this show at least 100 times, but like when he gets up and says, "Just come home," to a question, like, what do we do about the soldiers that we have stationed in Iraq and Afghanistan? And that's just his answer. It's just simple.
Exactly.
And you really feel that he cares about them. Like, I got the sense that, like, life mattered to him and that he wanted them to just come home. Mm-hmm. He was talking to his own children in a way, which unfortunately Rand doesn't seem able to do.
No, he has more of a politician's way of speaking.
Yeah, he does. And it's not inspiring.
Well, I can...
At least not for me.
Right, yeah. No, and when Ron Paul said that, it's like the first two rules. So use small words, "just come home," and it's a very short sentence, and it absolutely gets the point across. So he did a great job. Rule 8 is visualize. So use words that paint pictures in people's minds so that they can see what you're talking about. And then rule 9, ask a question. A statement, when put in the form of a rhetorical question, can have much greater impact than a plain assertion. And then rule 10 is provide context and explain relevance. That's 2 in 1, actually, but that's he lists that as rule 10. So if it doesn't matter to the intended audience, it won't be heard. So I've only gotten about a fourth of the way through this book so far, but it's taking a while. But that's because every page has good examples and it's practical, just a practical advice for how to get your message across. And one of the things, kind of to go along, Rob, with what you mentioned before about the Twitter posts from the Libertarian Party, about child labor. It's like when the average person hears that libertarians are in favor of child labor, or that they want to get rid of child labor laws, what they hear is libertarians want kids working in sweatshops.
Yes.
That's what they hear. That's not what we're saying, but that's what they hear. Libertarians, we got to work on our messaging. So say it in a way that it's something that it gets your meaning across right away. So you don't have to spend sentences digging through and getting your explanation across. So instead of get rid of child labor laws, say something like, we think that kids, teenagers, maybe younger, who are ready, willing, and able to do a job should be able to do it. If a 14-year-old wants to go work on a farm or go work at Taco Bell or something, and if they're able to do it, if they're capable, if they have the skills and the drive, why not? It's very on an individual basis. But if you frame it differently while still being true to your message, I think that's what libertarians need to work on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that feeling. The child labor one is one that really just gets my goat, because it also becomes, some people like to go even more extreme. One of the rules from that book was shock or surprise. And when a lot of libertarians love to shock.
That was like say something new or something, a novelty. That's what it was.
Yeah. And they like to say child labor because, and I think they say it knowingly. They know it's going to upset people.
Right.
And it's like part of my concern about it is that maybe it galvanizes a small number of people, and maybe there are people who can think beyond it initially, but the majority won't.
Right.
Whereas if you tell the story, like you said, a 14-year-old wants to work there, or one of the stories I was told when I was debating communications with somebody they were trying to make an age of consent argument. Was that when they were younger, they wanted to work in a small mom and pop business, and the only reason they didn't get to is because it was illegal. And I was like, open with that and never say age of consent again.
Yeah.
Because the story's a good one, and it is ridiculous that I couldn't hire my neighbor's kid who's 12 to do something without it being under the table. Like, that's ridiculous. Yeah. But if you say child labor, they hear sweatshops. And if you say age of consent, they hear truly awful, horrible things.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to go right to like trafficking or whatever. Yeah. Not a great plan.
Right. And so that thing where, let me see. That was rule number 5, novelty, offer something new. So let's see. There's a simple test to determine whether or not your message has met this rule. If it generates an, I didn't know that response, you have succeeded. And so even bringing up things like kids under 18 or under 16, I guess, being legally allowed to work and earn a paycheck, other topics that the other two parties don't cover, but libertarians are concerned about. Even that in itself is something novel and something new. And so bringing up the topic at all fits that criteria. You don't have to be shocking about it. Even bringing it up in the first place might be enough to catch people's attention.
Yeah, it's almost like going deep into libertarian ideas and philosophies. It desensitizes you to how kind of shaking these ideas can be at a much higher level.
Correct. Things like taxation is theft. You know, that's something that longtime libertarians, they throw around like it's nothing. They get it because they've had to deal with that for a while. But as a brand new libertarian or someone who's investigating this kind of thing, taxation is theft. It's a, simple words, simple sentence, but the concept, it's going to take a while to sink in. And so, you can't just throw, that's like,
Roads.
Roads. That's like sarcastic, and that's along the whole statist thing. I wouldn't go there because you're insulting people who don't agree with libertarianism, and you don't want to do that.
Well, I just mean like that's like the first response that you hear, right? When you hear taxation is theft. And so then you have to go on to the longer explanation. So sorry, I'm trying to agree with this statement that you're making.
Yeah, I think I'm on a different I took your phrase roads. That's something that libertarians say to insult people.
Yeah.
Who don't think that taxation is theft or who aren't on that level yet. So that's something that libertarians, I would suggest, get rid of. Don't say that because you are insulting people who haven't been in libertarianism as long as we have. So I would get rid of things like roads and statist as an insult. In fact, just don't insult people. How about that?
Certainly insulting people doesn't really seem to be working, as we look at our opposition that I think is doing well, like Bernie and AOC. Like AOC's killing it, man. Like she is absolutely dominant.
She is. But part of that is because she has made herself culturally relevant. Mm-hmm. She created a Twitch account. Twitch. Twitch is video game streaming service where people can record themselves playing a video game and other people can come and watch them. The people who do the best are those who are entertaining. But she created a Twitch account and got on Twitch and started interacting with people. Oh, that's another thing about Twitch. I'm not trying to plug Amazon here. Amazon owns Twitch. I'm not trying to do that. I'm saying Twitch is culturally relevant. And so is TikTok, so is Instagram, so is Twitter. And with Twitch, not only can you play a game and have people watch, but there's a system where you can interact with your viewers. And that's what she did. She created a Twitch account. She got on there to talk to young people about issues that she's trying to advocate. So I don't see any libertarians doing that. She did, though.
Rob, is there a bit of a how do you do, fellow kids in that, though? Like, what, or should we do as Lisa bids and get on the things the youngsters are liking? What do you say?
Well, I think what it comes down to is legitimacy of venue and engagement. So it's okay for AOC to start a Twitch channel because she's relatively young and she speaks to a younger audience. Like, yes, if Lindsey Graham tried to get on Twitch, nothing.
No.
I want that to happen now so bad.
Yeah, no, as I say it and picture it, it's like that would be the greatest thing in the world. But no, I think that it's a good example because I think there's a lot of ground to be had in libertarians exploring non-libertarian things. Whether it's like a lot of us get really lost and really deep in the philosophy funnel or in the policy funnel or in the party funnel. And we go more and more internal. And you have things like Twitch where you can go on Twitch. Well, okay, so Steve Martin, the comedian, has a piece of advice for aspiring comedians that is, if you want to be the X person, so let's just say X is frogs. If you wanted to be the frogs person, you don't need to write 5 minutes about frogs. You need a joke about frogs. If no one else is making jokes about frogs, then you do your 5 minutes and you close it with a frog bit, or you open or whatever. The fact that you mentioned it once means you're now that person. You own that mind space in the audience's head and everyone who heard it. And if you just go on one thing, you're less likely to succeed because you're talking to an audience, and this audience has a lot of interests. And I think that that's a really good example for pretty much anyone doing anything public facing, which is you don't have to just talk about X or read about X. In fact, if you can reference other things, and a non-liberty example would be, there's a fantasy football podcast that I like. And I've listened to a bunch of fantasy football podcasts. I used to really be into it, way less so now. But there's only one that I stuck with. And they routinely talk about video games and make jokes about the N64 specifically. And they routinely talk about movies. And of their hour podcast, this is less than 10 minutes. But this other thing that you hear and can connect on, it adds authenticity to them. And it makes the show way less boring and much more engaging. I think you two do this here when you do your media moment at the end. Where it's not necessarily like, now let's talk about the latest book or collection of essays by Hume or something, right? It's like, what? Hey.
People don't like that.
And I think there's a lot of wins to be had in that way as well. So like being on these other platforms, Neil deGrasse Tyson said that he thinks The Simpsons have been the biggest contributor to progressing science in American culture. But the show's not about science. They just make jokes about science, and when it comes up, they hold it up and they hold up scientists. But it's not about science. No one would say, yeah, The Simpsons is my favorite science show.
That's true.
I mean, no one in the last 10 years would say The Simpsons is their favorite anything show, but that's a different discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
But maybe in the 10 years before that, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, and that's a really good point, because Eric July, I would say that he's pretty culturally relevant. And I mean, he's big in libertarianism. He's an ANCAP. But he's been on YouTube for close to 10 years or so. And I found him because of one of his cultural relevancy episodes. It was something like, it might have been tokenization of characters in comics or in the MCU. It might have been something social, but he does that. His channel used to be comic book stuff and social commentary. And as his channel's gotten bigger, as he's gotten more into politics, he does videos about that as well. And so I first found him from a video that had to do with social issues or, I think it was social issues. And then I found out that he's a libertarian. And I was like, oh, really? That's cool. And then I found out he was an ANCAP, and I was like, oh, wow. And he still has a big audience. Incredible. So, but that's how a lot of people find him, is because he talks about other things. And then they can be introduced to some of the libertarian stuff because they're already interested in the other things that he has to say. And I don't know if there are other libertarians that do that.
There aren't many. I'm not thinking of many.
I can't think of many libertarians that are on Eric July's level as far as YouTube following or just, relevancy. Because he rants about the MCU all the time. And, I like listening to that. I've watched a lot of the MCU films, and I'm not into it as much as I was. And I haven't watched a lot of the more recent films. But, I appreciate that he appreciates the canon. Because I'm all about that. Respecting the source material type thing. So, but he talks about culturally relevant things. The MCU right now is culturally relevant. The Mandalorian is culturally relevant, or was. Video games, video games they make a lot of money. It's taken 30 years, but video game players are now not really seen as, the loser hanging out in your mom's basement. There are legitimate, serious, lucrative businesses around video games now. And so as a medium of entertainment, video games are extremely relevant. And I think it'd be great. Are there any, Rob, do you play video games a lot? Are you a gamer?
I to say a lot is a strong word, but I play off and on.
Okay. I play too much, I think, but it's like one game. Adam, you're way more diverse as far as your video game playing and stuff.
Yeah, there's my required league time, and then in like my actual enjoyment time on the side.
Yeah. Are there any video games you can think of that have strong libertarian messages, but they're not about libertarianism?
Especially nowadays, a lot of them actually will often have an anti-libertarian bent.
Right. A lot of TV shows and video games are like woke.
The most egregious example I could think of is the BioShock series. That's specifically anti-Randian, which is sort of adjacent to libertarianism. It's not just the wokeism, although that's certainly part of it. It's that almost the antagonist in just about everything is always evil corporation. It's actually it's almost more common than zombies in video games. The latest stand-in for Amazon or Walmart or whatever that you don't like these days is the ultimate bad guy, and there's a big fat cat at the top of it who's running things. I mean,
and he's never buying politicians off. It's never a part of the story.
Right.
Yeah. So it kind of sucks, but most games are made in California. So what are you going to do?
That's true. Yeah. They got the big studios.
I think the Mass Effect trilogy has like a story about like the importance of individuals, but it's not liberty. And depending on how you play it, you could just completely skip the whole thing. But yeah, no, it's not a common theme. Although I do think that gets to another point that I've personally been thinking a lot of, which is that I think there is room to win long-term relevance in media, even though, like, yes, Hollywood's controlled by who it's controlled by and yada yada yada, but smaller projects, especially with how content's distributed nowadays, things like digital comics and ebooks and whatnot, those are only going to keep growing. And at some point, Hollywood's going to need to adapt something new. And if the ideas are being told there, like in the MCU, a point I made to someone who was saying that it's Transformers drivel is that if you watch the first, I don't remember all the movies, but once you get to Avengers 2, for the next 8 movies, the meta narrative is governance versus freedom. And I have heard children argue Cap's side versus Iron Man's side, and not about weapons, but about the ideas. And they're arguing this free of any adult's influence. And
that's beautiful.
I think that's and these aren't Free State kids either. These are just kids. So I think that when I saw that, I was like,